Who runs this place? Written constitutions versus political conventions and steering groups. Now, in the previous talks, I've detailed the whole historical process that's gone through and the tension between written constitutions and political conventions and steering groups, and also organised crime and terrorism. Now I'm going to conclude. Okay, what can we do to finally put all this uh, to bed, so to speak, and have a written constitution and the sort of society that we would like? Well, as I mentioned in the last talk, we need to fundamentally change the way the armed forces are trained. We need to train the armed forces in counter espionage. That's the most pressing problem that we have, because organised crime and terrorism, and also legitimate political networks know how to network, whereas we're placing all of um, our defence in conventional warfare, which is not where these people will attack us from. What can you do against terrorist organisations that threaten people's families? That's the key point. We're dealing with insurgencies uh, in Afghanistan, with a similar problem, and counter-terrorism, similar problem. We're dealing with elites that are um, trying to convince us of unrealities. Like, for one big thing on the internet that really bothers me is this thing about 9/11, and we people keep emailing me saying that 9/11 was an inside job. 9/11 was not an inside job. Okay, I've looked at both sides of this, and the people who are pressing forward that 9/11 was an inside job are fundamentally um, a bad lot. Let me just say that. I don't want to really say any more or give it any more credence, okay? But I've looked at both sides of the scientific evidence for both. 9/11 was done by Al Qaeda, and Al Qaeda is being underestimated as a organisation. Okay, Al Qaeda isn't just the Taliban and some shoe bombers, okay, or some hijackers who took over a plane, and and 9/11 just happened. There was a whole raft of historical evidence that suggests that Al Qaeda goes right back into to links with the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood and all the rest of it. It's a financial power. It's an industrial power. It has a construction businesses, banks. It's an organised crime um, organisation which uses religion to recruit members. Then some of those members will then become operatives, and it usually takes those operatives from the Western university system. Okay, so we're talking about infiltration. This is not the only private army or private intelligence network. Okay, there's many of them. There's at least 10 main private intelligence organisations linked to organised crime and terrorism in this world. Chiefly among them we think of the Russian mafia and Al Qaeda, but they're not the biggest ones. Okay, now how do we solve this problem? Well, fundamentally, the central banking system has been run on inflationary measures, which have actually decreased the amount um, of real wages that people get, and so this has created the problem of people having to take out credit to maintain their standard of living, and now we're seeing the result of this in the whole financial crisis. But this does not mean that if we went back to a gold standard, it would take us back to an elite controlling the gold standard. Okay, so you can't really choose between fiat money or gold standard. The best way is to go for a middle road with an index, a basket of goods, and this really the best alternative here is the euro. I tell you why I believe the European Union is the solution to some of our problems, although the European Union has corruption in it, as seen by the scandal between the Belgian ministers and arms contracts with NATO. Okay, who was sending US jet parts to Iran, for instance. Now, this organisation, the European Union, acts as a confederation of states, but acts as an international organisation. It has a written constitution. Okay, it has real economic power. Okay, the biggest financial market in the world, the FTSE 100. Okay, this is what the second biggest. The biggest exporter in the world, Germany. Okay, it has the best universities in the world, in Europe and in Britain. Okay, and England, and this university system, if you could get people to be trained in security, for instance, against radicalisation, it's particularly in the Muslim population at the moment. That's the main threat. But in these other private networks, okay, which are not as well known as Al Qaeda, but they're in the focus of the authorities' minds. Okay, now we have to trust in our authorities. Okay, now that doesn't mean that we trust our government, but we trust that the authorities are trying to work in our best interest. Otherwise, society will fall down completely. You know, how do we democratise the whole system of all these private steering groups and lobbyists and all the rest of it? Or you can radicalise them, to regulate them, to have them under select committees in Parliament, okay, to make the political conventions of Parliament into statutes, okay, which the ones which are democratic, and the ones that are undemocratic we outlaw through statute. You need to get the government to be more powerful, to be able to go through this process, and then to go to decentralise after this process, after terrorism has been defeated, which can never be completely done, because terrorism is a tactic. It can be reduced significantly, but after it's been reduced significantly, you can then increase the amount of liberty and equality in the system. This can be done through the European Union, through the Human Rights Act, through legislation that has real teeth, that the executive can actually bring to bear. Now, the European Union has the ability, because it's such an economically large bloc and is the middle road between extreme globalism or extreme nationalism, to actually make sure that companies do not have the mobility to move around the world as much as they could. That means that companies will put down deeper national roots and make deeper commitments to national society. So we have to re-establish this concept of the nation, the concept of society, within a social democratic framework that has some liberal and libertarian and equalitarian viewpoints. But I think also, particularly through this point that we're going through, this fractious nature of the world, that Stoic philosophy and logic should be taught in schools, to develop a culture that is analytical of politics and doesn't just follow a spectrum of subjects which the politicians and steering groups and universities and things say that is acceptable. Rather than having taboo subjects on right and left, we need to be able to analyse those subjects and say, are these right or are they wrong? And have a politics based on the scientific method of that, yes, we are always going to be wrong, but we can decrease the margin of error, rather than ideology. Okay, so I am a social democrat, but I'm only loosely a social democrat. If there's something wrong with that, I will not believe it.